Tinian, 1944. The air shimmers with heat, smelling of aviation fuel and coral dust. Before you stands the B-29 Superfortress, a silver behemoth, the most advanced aircraft in the world. Its 4 propellers are wider than a man is tall. Its pressurized fuselage promises a comfortable ride to 30,000 feet above the enemy's reach. To the young crews climbing aboard, it's not just a plane, it's the future. It's the weapon that will win the war and bring them home. But the real killer wasn't waiting for them over Tokyo. It was already there, humming in the heat, a promise of technological marvel that hid a terrible secret. The greatest threat to these airmen wasn't the Japanese, it was the very machine they were counting on for survival. By the end of this, you'll understand the dark reason why so many B-29 crewmen were swallowed by the Pacific, long before they ever saw the coast of Japan. What happens when your greatest strength becomes your fatal flaw? To understand the trap, you have to understand the problem the US military was trying to solve in 1943. Japan was an island fortress, thousands of miles across the ocean. Existing bombers like the B-17 and B-24 didn't have the range to hit the Japanese home islands and return. The answer was a new kind of bomber, one with unprecedented range and payload. The B-29 was born from this need. It was designed to be a strategic game-changer, able to fly from newly captured islands in the Marianas, like Saipan, Guam and Tinian, all the way to Japan and back. But these islands were primitive, hot, and dusty hellholes. The airfields were hastily carved out of coral, still under construction, while the bombers were already arriving. The environment was a brutal combination of equatorial heat, humidity, and fine coral dust that got into everything. Commanders believed the B-29's advanced design would overcome these challenges. They saw a technological marvel that would shrug off the conditions and deliver a knockout blow. Then the first combat missions began, and the paper logic burned. On paper, the B-29 was invincible. It was a quantum leap forward. 4 massive Wright R-350 engines gave it the power to haul a 10,000-pound bomb load for over 3,000 miles. Its pressurized cabin meant the 11-man crew could work in shirt sleeves without freezing at high altitude, a radical improvement over earlier bombers. The remote-controlled, computer-assisted gun turrets were straight out of science fiction, allowing gunners to aim and fire from protected stations inside the fuselage. It was fast, high-flying, and packed a devastating punch. The crews who trained on it were in awe. They felt like they were part of an elite force, operating a machine that was years ahead of its time. The Japanese military, when they first encountered it, had no fighters that could reliably reach its cruising altitude. The B-29 was supposed to be an untouchable avenger, delivering the war directly to the Japanese people. But this technological marvel came with a technological curse, a flaw written into its very DNA. Dark reason number 1, the engine's fiery heart. The B-29's greatest strength, its 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines, was also its greatest betrayer. These were monstrously complex and powerful engines, but they were rushed into production without the years of testing normally required. The critical flaw was cooling. To make the B-29 streamlined and fast, the engines were crammed into tight-fitting cowlings. This design trapped heat, especially on the ground and during the long full-power climb to altitude. The mechanism was simple and deadly. Inadequate airflow caused the cylinder heads to overheat, which would in turn cause the oil to break down and ignite. A single red-hot cylinder could seize a piston, and from there, it was a short path to an uncontrollable fire that would consume the entire wing. In the battlefield reality of the Marianas, this meant every takeoff was a roll of the dice. Imagine you're a pilot, throttles forward, lumbering down a dusty coral runway on a 95-degree day, carrying 10 tons of high explosives. You're pushing those engines harder than they were ever designed to handle. The human experience was a constant low-grade terror. Every crewman learned to watch the cylinder head temperature gauges, to sniff the air for the first hint of burning oil. The consequence was often a frantic mayday call 100 miles from base, followed by a bailout into the vast empty Pacific. And that was only the first problem. Dark reason number 2, the unseen killer in the wires. The B-29 wasn't just an airplane, it was a flying network of complex systems. The pressurization, the advanced avionics, and especially the central fire control system for the guns required miles of wiring. This was a new frontier in aviation, and it created a new kind of danger. The mechanism was insidious. A chafed wire, a poorly soldered connection, or moisture trapped in a junction box could create a short circuit. In a non-pressurized plane, this might just cause a spark. In the B-29, it could start a fire deep inside a wing or the fuselage, far from any fire extinguisher. The battlefield reality was a dark, pressurized tube flying through the air, filled with hidden electrical gremlins. The human experience was one of sudden, inexplicable panic. Imagine you're the flight engineer, and suddenly you see smoke wafting from a panel. You have no idea where it's coming from or how to stop it. Or you're a gunner, and your turret control box erupts in sparks. Knowing that the actual turret is bathed in aviation fuel and hydraulic fluid, the consequence was often a rapid, uncontrollable fire that forced the crew to abandon the aircraft. If they were lucky enough to have the altitude to do so, the very systems designed to protect them were wired to become their executioners. Dark Reason 3. The Typhoon Trap, the flight path from the Marianas to Japan, passed through some of the most violent and unpredictable weather on the planet. In the 1940s, meteorology was a primitive science. Typhoons, the Pacific's version of hurricanes, could form and intensify with little warning. The mechanism was a lethal combination of ignorance and geography. B-29 crews, often flying on instruments through solid cloud layers, could fly directly into the wall of a typhoon without ever seeing it. The extreme turbulence could rip the aircraft apart, and the severe icing could rob the wings of their lift, sending the massive bomber into an unrecoverable dive. The battlefield reality was a 500-mile journey over an ocean that offered no second chances. The human experience was pure terror. Imagine being in a tin can being tossed around by a giant. The plane groans and shrieks, objects fly around the cabin, and the altimeter spins wildly as the aircraft plummets thousands of feet in seconds. There is no recovery. There is only the ocean rushing up to meet you. The consequence was simple. Entire crews vanished without a trace, their loss often attributed to unknown causes because there were no survivors and no wreckage to examine. The weather was an invisible, indiscriminate hunter. Dark Reason 4. The Pressure Cooker Doctrine. General Curtis LeMay, the commander of the B-29 force, was under immense pressure to produce results. The High Command in Washington wanted to see Japanese cities burning. This pressure trickled down the chain of command, creating a relentless operational tempo. The mechanism was human fatigue and corner cutting. Maintenance crews, working 16-hour shifts in sweltering heat, were pushed to get damaged B-29s patched up and flying again as quickly as possible. Parts that should have been scrapped were reused. Temporary fixes became permanent. Crews were ordered to fly in weather that was by any sane measure unacceptable. The battlefield reality was a culture where good enough for now became the standard. The human experience was one of quiet dread. A pilot might notice a small oil stain on the tarmac under his engine during pre-flight, but the crew chief, exhausted and pressured by the operations officer, would wave it off as normal seepage. The crew would take off, knowing in their gut that something wasn't right, but unwilling to be the one to ground the aircraft and delay the mission. The consequence was that planes that were already on the edge of failure were being sent into the most demanding environment imaginable, virtually guaranteeing disaster. The very strategy designed to win the war was actively sacrificing the men and machines tasked with carrying it out. Dark Reason 5. The vast, indifferent ocean. This was the final crushing factor that turned every other problem into a death sentence. Over Europe, a crew with a crippled bomber had a chance. They could bail out over friendly territory, or they could try to crash land in a field. Over the Pacific, there was nothing. The mechanism was simple geography. A bailout meant a tiny life raft in thousands of miles of shark-infested water. A ditching attempt in heavy seas almost always broke the B-29's fuselage on impact. The battlefield reality was that any mechanical failure, no matter how minor, was potentially catastrophic. The human experience was the ultimate loneliness. Imagine successfully bailing out of your burning bomber, watching your friends parachute into the water around you, and then realizing the true scale of your isolation. The sun beats down, the water offers no relief, and the rescue ships are hundreds of miles away. The consequence was that even successful emergency procedures were often just a slower, more terrifying way to die. The ocean was the final accomplice, ensuring that the B-29's flaws were paid for in full. And so, the ocean became the silent partner to every engine fire, every electrical short and every storm. The story comes full circle to that airfield in Tinian. We see the B-29 not as a marvel of technology, but as a roll of the dice. The gleaming silver skin hides a web of potential failures. The 4 engines, once symbols of power, now look like 4 ticking time bombs. The young crew climbing the boarding ladder are not just heading for Japan, they are heading into a lottery where the odds are stacked against them. The Dark Reason B-29 crews died before they ever reached Japan was a catastrophic mismatch. A bleeding edge, rushed into production aircraft was thrown into the most demanding operational environment on Earth, and then pushed beyond its limits by a doctrine that valued results over reliability. The plane's own ambition became the weapon that turned against its crews. The lasting impact of this tragedy reshaped American air power. The painful lessons of the B-29 program led directly to the post-war emphasis on exhaustive flight testing, reliability engineering, and maintenance protocols that are now standard. It proved that technological sophistication is worthless without dependability. The B-29 eventually became a decisive weapon, especially after LeMay switched to low-altitude firebombing raids, but it came at a terrible human cost. The plane that was built to defeat Japan first had to defeat itself. The dark reason is that war punishes ambition, and it punishes it most harshly not in the heat of battle, but in the cold, mechanical silence of a failing engine 1,000 miles from land, and the men inside the aluminum tubes paid the price.